Welcome, everybody, to the Coherence 2025. Coherence 2025. How do we label this conversation? Governance conversation. It started from an attribution conversation, and this is essentially what we're calling a build in the open conversation, right? But help me to kind of label it. The three of you, I think we have more than enough understanding in this room to kind of get an idea of what we're talking about here. But it really is we're building a part of what we think coherence is needing out in the open and having discussions for it. But welcome, Bart, Christine, Gus. So good to have you. It's my morning. Maybe let's just do a small check-in around the room and see where everybody's at, and then let's dive into this conversation. And we'll start it off with the attribution piece of this and what it means to put our content into this and what type of attributions we want Coherence 2025 to have. And then let's dive into some of the governance pieces of like, how do we govern together? How do we create more together and protect and enable all the stakeholders within the ecosystem? So I'll start off with a quick check-in. I'm coming in from Colombia, Bogota. It's a little chilly in the mornings here, so I got my poncho on. But I'm feeling good after being sick for so long. Man, I've been really down for 2 weeks being sick. But I'm back on top of work and excited to be here. I'll pass it over to Bart, and then we'll go Gus and then Christine.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. Good to be here, calling in from the Netherlands. Yeah, feeling excited to have this conversation. And yeah, for me, just to pitch in my perspective, I think this is really about, yeah, how do we reward contributions when we are working together in a collective? And with Coherence, it's specifically about these conversations and sharing knowledge that will potentially also be fed into an AI agent. And then how do we work with all these contributions? How do we, yeah, acknowledge these contributions and, at some point, even with monetary rewards or tokens, we haven't decided on anything yet, but I think this is the start of that conversation. And like you say, building in public as we go. You have some experience with this. I know Gus is working on a tool that looks at rewarding people more in teams, but also in the future for ecosystems. And I think this is a new field, and super excited and love pioneering this with all of you.
Thank
Yes.
you, Bart. And here I am connecting from northern Italy. It's the start of the summer and it's really hot around here. And yes, as Bart mentioned, I'm working at this startup where we are offering a platform for teams to give a fair reward and compensation to their contributors. And I'm more curious about the jargon, the language that we are using in this context. Joshua have talked about attribution. I'm coming from the compensation one, but also allocation, rewarding, like what are we meaning? I would love to maybe start to making a common sense about what we understand about each of these words that we are using basically to give people something back for the work that they have done towards a team, a collective. Yeah, to understand what are the different forms of that you guys are foreseeing. That's me. You want to go, Christine?
Awesome. Yeah, my name's Christine Francis. I'm tuning in from Turrbal and Yagara country here in southeast Queensland. Has had indigenous people here for over 60,000 years living on this land. So I respect the deep roots of the culture, and also I have a deep passion for the blistering hot newness of our current times. So there's a lot of interesting shades and colors and textures throughout the human bandwidths that we have. And I really wonder how we can capture any of that in any kind of attribution or like contribution tracking when we are such a cultural species and a relational species. So yeah, some big thoughts in my mind when we enter this conversation. So thanks.
Yeah, it's huge. I don't know that we're going to have all the answers in however long we're going to have here today with each other. But I think it's definitely something that we should be having conversation around, right? And we've had, I don't know, Bart, how many conversations at this point? Like at least three conversations in regards to just attribution, right? And it's started to, maybe let's preface that conversation, those few conversations into this and what's been created so far for Coherence 2025. And then let's kind of dive into all the other pieces of it. And so maybe Bart, you can help me in kind of exploring this piece. But to put it into the Coherence 2025 context, for those that are new and listening to Coherence, and you're coming into an interesting conversation, if you are, for your first conversation with Coherence 2025, we've been doing this asynchronous conference, trying to find others within the collaborative technology space to collaborate with. And that's the whole purpose of our conversations is collaboration. How do we collaborate towards regenerative futures, regenerative outcomes through the technology that we're utilizing? And there's lots of different projects and co-stewarding folks trying to find ways to not build in isolation within this ecosystem, but to start collaborating with one another. And it really, maybe it's interoperability, maybe it's actually forming projects together. But one of the things that have come up during that process is how do we attribute, Bart has like you have those logos surrounding you as this halo, right? And how do all of those folks, just to see those brands on there, collaborate with one another within this environment? Because several of those folks are within the Coherence framework that we're talking about here. And the first part was, how do we attribute the work that we're creating together? That was just the thing that came up in the very beginning. And we had a hard time kind of understanding. Victor wanted to just put it in public domain. We wanted to see a little bit more, at least an attribution of work. So we looked at the Creative Commons by license and decided we would start from there. But Bart, do you want to give us a little bit more into just those three conversations that we've had and what kind of came of it? And then we can kind of dive into any of the other pieces.
Before that, maybe just let me make this question. What is attribution in this context? Attribution is something quantitative, is something qualitative, is a recognition, is a payment. What is attribution for you guys?
Yeah. So a lot of people can maybe get around attribution in the Creative Commons realm, right? You see it all over the place. You see, oh, this is held in the Creative Commons, or this is held in it's the license at which someone could use someone's content with or without attributing their work, right? And so if we're talking about attribution for the content that we're creating, that's really what this context is for. How do we use it on YouTube as a collaborative whole? How do we use it anywhere? How does someone else use it that comes into view with the content? How can they use that the content that we've created as well?
Okay, so then we are on the same page. Thank you. So my question is, what is the gap? What is that Creative Commons is not solving, or any IP framework is not solving for you guys? What is what you're looking forward in terms of attribution itself?
Yeah, maybe to respond and also to follow up on Josh. I think actually, Josh, you summarized the conversations quite well. Like where Victor proposed to put everything in public, and this was specifically when it comes to the license of the data and knowledge that we contribute through these conversations that will both be published on YouTube and be used for training an AI agent. And we said, well, I think it would be fair. We think it would be fair to have at least some kind of attribution, and the Creative Commons, I think, does a good job. So I don't know if there's really a gap there. I think it works well for now. It may be. Well, it may be. I think we're simply exploring that field, and it may be that we want to go a step further, and for example, also talk about like the ownership and the governance and the compensation, like you were mentioning, like how will people be compensated when this shared data and this shared uh, pool of work brings value into the world, maybe is transformed into a startup. Well, you know about that, Gus, like what happens with everything that's contributed before something becomes a startup or before there's any revenue. How do you structure that? We don't have all the answers, and there I think there's also still legal frameworks missing at this point. Like we're simply a group of people coming together. There's no formal organization. Like how do these things work? I honestly don't really know. This is kind of new for me, but as we are, working together, these questions come up, and I think this is part of the build-in-public philosophy that we aim to advocate. Is like also bring this conversation out in the open, and yeah, have this conversation together, and also share it with the world, and see what kind of response comes from that.
Okay, I get it. Well, for me, it's first of all, it's necessary to establish this thing about legal frameworks, because legal frameworks, what they give us is just templates for building organizations. Or an organization is just a construct. Okay, it's this entity that we create in our minds out of our agreements to create this collective action towards a common purpose. So legal frameworks give us this construct about organizations that could then represent any benefits of liability that this collective of people is working together with. And this includes the attribution, like for um, yeah, for public domains, for the Creative Commons and so on, you can actually give the attributions towards this organization. In many cases, you might need the legal organization to be formed. In other cases, you just need this free association of people deciding to work together under the same project, even if there is no legal organization there. This is one thing. Then from the other side, we have crypto platforms where we can also register new associations of individuals into an organization. We can also create a construct in a blockchain that is representing ownership, that is representing benefits or liabilities over whatever assets and projects that we work on there. That's one thing, like to understand that there are individuals as entities, but we're also creating these collective entities that we call organization. Either if they are living in the imaginarium or if they are living in a registry in a traditional jurisdiction, or if they are living on a blockchain. Okay. And then another level of complexity is actually how this relationship between individuals and collective is built. If we're talking about traditional organizations, you find the equity as a unit of measure on how much each of us is owning in the cake of this collective entity. And in the Imaginarium is like really difficult because people don't get together and account for how much of this cake is equal is we are owning in regards of this collective. And in these blockchain systems now we have tokens. That tokens can represent a right, a claim over whatever, in our case, in our discussion, attribution this collective entity if is forming. So I'm just making this all clear and trying to break it down to understand what if there is a tension in any of these levels, and if we are easy to identify what do we need to work on, what do we need to organize ourselves, and what we need to agree, because it's a matter of agreeing basically on the structure that a group of people define for interacting for this collective. And once we identify that, we can just state what is the issue, the challenge, the concern, and after identify that concern, then it's more easy, of course, to define the solution and to start building the structure to move forward. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. Thanks, Gus, for that context. I think it helps our listeners as well as ourselves to kind of understand what we're getting ourselves into together in any collaborative project. I'd like to hear from Christine on maybe the reasons for well, I think this sets some good context, like why I invited you and Robin to this Coherence ecosystem, but you're kind of holding a couple different stakeholder roles, I think, within this. You're acting as a co-steward, but you have some projects that you've brought that you're heavily involved into as well. And I think you kind of represent more of the stakeholders, and that's something that I've noticed. Like you mentioned those models, Gus. Like there's the traditional equity model that we see out there, and a lot of times that really only encompasses the co-founders or the co-stewards of an ecosystem, and the equity splits of like and the early investors as well. So, and a lot of times investors take a lot of power within that ecosystem, even though they're not building it, and a lot of times don't have the stay. And then you look at maybe a DAO, or you look at some other organizational share structures. I personally use the Fair Share Commons model, but they don't value all stakeholders is the challenge. And a lot of our current business structuring, we don't. It's not even about value. There's the valuing part, but there's also just the voice part. Are we giving voice to all stakeholders? One, if you think about that, do we give voice to future generations? Do we give voice to Mother Nature in our businesses? And so those stakeholders, I think, obviously we're utilizing nature. Often our businesses exploit and extract from nature, or they exploit and extract from future generations. Like if you look at Walmart, right? That is just a perfect example of a stakeholder that was totally ignored, and it ruined entire local economies by putting up these big box places. This is something that I think we don't look at, we don't even think about, don't even have the conversations about. And in regeneration, it's something that we should definitely be thinking about. So Christine, I kind of want to bring it back to you, is like you're representing these multiple stakeholders. What do you see the value, the voice, and all the other pieces? Like how would you hope that you and the other stakeholders that you're kind of representing, as you've brought in several others as well, to have conversations on, What do you think? What's your hope for them and for yourself?
I guess in this instance, I've been leaning into creative collaboration and what does that mean? So we're trying to define ourselves as a group of collaborative tech builders having a collaborative experience through collaborative conversation. So it's definitely at the core of what we're trying to establish here, like the dynamic and the type of exchange that we're imagining together. I think that maybe that's not super clear, then that could be a space where we could flesh out what collaboration means. Because within collaboration, attribution might feel different than in another setting. And so, like, to me, collaboration has a lot of dynamics bound up in it potentially, where it can be like where you swim side by side and your thoughts flow in parallel, or it could be collaboration could be very dynamic where you like take apart each other's Lego castle and then trade bricks and end up with like something totally different at the end. So for me, the interesting part is the actual dynamics of collaboration and creation, and then potentially looking at then how we give value and reward or some other kind of generative capacity from that. So if we can look at how someone's acting in this type of ecosystem and we can see their level of contribution as a collaborator, I think that is a nice way of trying to create some meaning, perhaps. Maybe it's not about levels, but maybe it's about types of collaborators as well, and building some sort of wisdom around that could be interesting. So there's a couple of thoughts.
If I may, and just to integrate a little bit what I'm listening from both Joshua and Christine. From one side, Joshua is defining this problem of Walmart, like they, in their aim to gain efficiency and gaining the markets, they have optimized processes and let's call it collaboration interactions towards maximizing profits and putting that as an end. Just profit. Money can be seen as a mean to facilitate collaboration because it facilitates a lot of accounting. What Christine was saying, like if people are collaborating, if they are putting some value on the table, it's fair that that labor is actually accounted for and recognized for, so they can also have some retribution. But if we go back to the Walmart example, it's a mess because in that case, money is also an end. So when you put money as an end, the rest of externalities that you cause in those economies, even if it's a social or local economy impact or ecological impact, people don't give a fuck. I'm sorry for my French, because the goal is money. The goal is profit, right? So, and this is something because it's really super fresh for me. I'm coming from this collaborative finance summit in Austria that happened last week. And we were having a lot of discussions on this topic. And one of the conclusions was, yeah, we need to bring new ways of accounting that is actually accounting for every kind of utility, every kind of different value that is actually brought to the table, that each community can value in a different way. Ecosystem weaving, for example, is something that we know is really valuable for the wealth and innovation and creating values in each of the organizations belonging to an ecosystem, but usually is not something that is recognized by the traditional market dynamics, right? So one of the questions is that one. How do we, for example, and again, coming back to Bart image, like each of these organizations is delivering something different to their ecosystems. In the case of TDF, I see the ship there very well. TDF is one of these examples that they have already their own unit of account. And in that unit of account, there is a value of some time that you could spend on the TDF land, right? And the same it will be for the gathering. Maybe if the gathering start to have this own unit of account, it can be a value for going back um, to the festival, to the gathering itself, or maybe permits of doing a festival in a new place, or I don't know whatsoever, right? So if coherence starts, and this is just me thinking out loud and just my final thoughts, and then I will shut up. If the organizations within coherence start to define what is the utility that they are bringing to the ecosystem, and so how we can encode or put that utility into a unit of account. In blockchain, we call that to tokenize their offer. And this is still a theory, but this is kind of the work that I would like to do. This when we optimize for each one of these organizations for delivering a better utility there, instead of using a common monolithic measure like money is, that's where we will start to see regeneration in our economies, because we will enable plurality, we will enable a diversity of unit of accounts that can then interact with each other. Maybe there will be new market dynamics out of that. That's where we will see how the different organizations are interacting among them.
Yeah,
Hope
there's
it makes.
no, I think it does, and it adds to the conversation. When you, Christine, were saying like the different ways we can collaborate, I think that's a good, like, it's a good starting point, especially for like Coherence 2025. Like, I think it's also some of the early, like if we take that Walmart example again, like we were missing some stakeholders, obviously, further down the line, but I really think it required that observation and interaction, that permaculture principle of understanding what the ecosystem is actually before you place something in that ecosystem and create something in that ecosystem. But that observation, a lot of times we don't do that because we're startups and we're just trying to get to revenue or sustainability for the business. And so we're that vehicle that puts itself up on two wheels. And while we're changing out the other two wheels, moving down the road, that's like a perfect analogy of like what a business startup is in so many cases. And we're doing that as a collaborative group as well. So we've been building coherence while we've been putting out the content, and then realizing that we need all of these other governance pieces as well. So how do we also kind of step back and say, okay, let's observe what's going on here. Who are the stakeholders that play? Who are the potential stakeholders that can be coming in to play relatively quick? And I think that's like that first step of like, we got to really understand and value that process of taking that step back almost continually, like as we're building, to say, okay, who are the people that are involved right now? Who are the people that are potentially getting involved, or we are actually having these conversations, and identify those types of stakeholders? Because once we understand and identify them, we can actually start to identify how they're relating with one another. And if we understand the relation of those stakeholders, now we can actually start to determine who's contributing what, how are they potentially contributing, and value their contributions in the right way before. This is what I see in most typical startups, and this is like the default way because we are just trying to run startups. Someone someone is access source as this. They start gathering people, whether it's co-founders or early employees, and they just it's a suck. They're just sucking in everything they possibly can to make this viable at this point, right? But they're not thinking about attribution. They're not thinking about value, who's creating the value. And a startup gets started. And yes, maybe a few co-founders and stuff distribute wealth and the initial work together. But many of the stakeholders are taken advantage of or weren't even thought of in that process of creation. And the actual business becomes extractive by default because we just don't think about it. And that's a challenge. Like we just don't do it. We just don't put enough thought to it. And it turns out we create the Walmarts, we create the Amazons, all of the different pieces. And I don't think it's intentional. I don't think we're really. I don't think what's his face? Walmart. Who did Walmart? Wall. It has Wall in it, right? So it has his name in it. Sam Walton, right? Sam Walton. I don't think Sam Walton really wanted to throw people in the mud and ruin local economies and small shop holders and in that way. I don't think that was his intention. I think his intention was to actually bring products and services that no one had ever seen in small towns. That's honestly what the value was. And entrepreneurs, that's what they're thinking of. They're thinking of value that they're bringing to their customer, but they don't. They only look at a couple stakeholders. They look at their investors, and they look at themselves, and they look at the end user customer, and that's really all they're looking at. They're not looking at the more holistic view of there's multiple stakeholders within this. How do we serve them as well? And I think it serves. It not only serves the business by doing that, it serves everybody else. And so in this context, how are we doing that with Coherence 2025? Are we doing that with Coherence 2025? I don't know. I would say that we're honestly, it's an even harder part because we bring within these practices, we actually bring more collaborative organizations and more stakeholders into regenerative businesses typically than we do otherwise, but we don't have the skill sets to manage those collective stakeholders properly. So it turns into the same of the old at this point. And that's what I've seen in at least 3 collaborative regenerative collaborative groups coming together, and that each of those collaborations turning into a frustration that the stakeholders weren't considered in the first place. So I don't think we're doing a necessarily better job at this point because it's new to us and we don't know exactly what we're doing.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Josh, and all the other interesting points. I really like what Christine is bringing up, indeed, about mapping the different stakeholders and see how can we track their contributions to this collective, to this creation. I think that's one of the ways, one of the important aspects to, well, in the first place, give acknowledgement for the work that they do, but eventually, ideally, indeed, like Gus was pointing towards, to give them utility through some kind of token. And this is something that is a question that's in my mind a lot, because I feel that's where you can kind of close the loop, that people can see, okay, I put effort in or I contribute, I get this token, and with this token I can do this. With money it's very clear, but otherwise I think we are giving an opportunity actually to be very creative with this. And I think TDF is a good example with a very specific kind of utility. Like with one token, you can stay for one night a year at TDF in a room. So on the one hand, I'm curious, like, what could this be for Coherence, and how can we actually figure out what is the utility of a token, or maybe what are the utilities of tokens, having several tokens? I don't know. And then there's this other aspect of, like, on the one hand, it would be nice to have it clear from the start and have it baked into the whole model, like have the whole model. But I can also imagine this might come a little bit later. This is something more of an emergent property. And so also how can we work with that where we do start tracking contribution and that it's kind of clear that it has value while we might not know the utility of a token that's attached to what you get back. So I don't know. That's something that's alive with me, and I see often that it's not clear, like not clear, this agreement of getting tokens, but then also the bridge to the utility eventually and how that's being designed. Because I know you want to respond. Please go.
Yeah. No, it's basically what you say. I mean, first of all, many times it's just okay, let's just measure in reference to each other. Like in a small context of a team, if a team has a clear purpose towards something, maybe they don't know how to measure its utility yet, but if we start measuring ourselves in terms of, okay, how many leave, for example, just to use another example to avoid saying dollars or euros or whatever. But if I know that my work, let's say that I'm a software engineer, senior developer for 20 years, for doing my job is 20 something, and maybe Bart, he's an ecosystem weaver, he has a huge network and so on, and his work is 15 something, right? And if we do this process in a small team in which we are able to identify what is the value that we are bringing to this common purpose, this is not regarding what is my value as a human being, because this is another story, a lot of backgrounds that might be relevant or not to what I'm representing in this context toward this organization. So that's a good point of a start. Then it's also interesting how to do it at an ecosystem level when the level of complexity, when is one level up, when we are just mapping this ecosystem value flows in a different levels. Okay, we need to understand how each organization in this ecosystem is actually valuing each other, so we can start to understand what is this trading rate from what an organization is coming from here to what this organization is coming from there. And this is just a complex layer because we need to add this interrelational and also intersubjective, because value is a very subjective thing. So measuring value is subjective to the needs and needs, necessities of each person or group. But what I think is that if we start by providing some structure to start mapping out these value relations, because it's not only about how much value I have, it's like how this value is agreed in these relationships. This is going to be a start for something. And having said so, I'm sorry that I'm just leaving it just like a pop-up like that. I know that this deserves some more deeper conversation. I need to leave because I have already a meeting that I'm 4 minutes late. Very sorry about that, but love you all.
Yeah,
Another
thanks,
time.
Gus.
Thanks for being here, Gus.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Christine, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I think we're onto the right tracks here. I just started to imagine when he was talking that like maybe you can only really see it from the end looking back, but then I thought, no, that's not correct. Like there's always going to be ongoing flows and changes happening. So in some ways, I think that it's almost about the life cycle of ideas. And do we have a good grip on that? Because that's at the core of this kind of engagement, is how are our ideas progressing? and acknowledging that some ideas do compost and dissolve when others come through. That doesn't mean that they didn't land anywhere either. So maybe this organic approach to like idea life cycles could provide some context.
Yeah, no, I think it does. We can't, and that's like the value of like you can't understand what is contributing at any given point. What if the compost from that one company actually starts or one contribution starts the process for what is really needed for the entire ecosystem to thrive. And there's the I'm gonna bring it up because I'm deep in the process of it. We're setting up a fair share commons for RegenBEE, right? And I'm actually going through like Evolute 6's process for incorporating a fair share commons model. And what that means for those that are listening, it means that no one owns the business that we're creating. We're getting rid of that thought of ownership, and we're putting it into a commons, but we're putting it into a closed commons rather than an open commons, meaning that the tragedy of the commons is when you have these open commons, people can extract and exploit because there's not a protecting governance structure and an enabling structure that allows for common resources to be fairly distributed to all the stakeholders. And I really love the process that I'm going through in this because we're looking at multiple businesses. We're creating an association is the fundamental business model, right? So it's members. The members are coming in, they're contributing resources into the ecosystem, and we're doing shared work together, right? So one of the first projects that we're working on is a media alliance for one another. Like, how do we pool resources towards that media alliance? Some people are going to offer their mailing list. Some people are going to offer their content. Some people are going to offer their network, their community. Others are going to offer financial. So there's already there multiple capital structures, like multiple capital flows going into a shared project together. How do we, how we're designing our fair share commons has to start with the intentionality of what the ecosystem already is. So we've identified through market research, and I think this is probably how market research typically goes and does interviews, and you start getting buyer persona understandings, but it's usually just that one stakeholder. It's the buyer, right? That you're getting information on. In reality, we've looked at the market research a little differently. We've seen multiple stakeholders, and we've chatted with so many folks and had interviews like this, where we're actually trying to build it with them, and we get an understanding of what they truly want, right? And how they're actually working with one another. We've put that into AI conversations in an AI data set to where we can actually talk to our buyers, our educators within the ecosystem, other entrepreneurs, and all the other stakeholders that we've recognized patterns around. Like, these are the types of folks that are going to be engaging with one another. I honestly think that's the way to go. We still have to build the product while we're having these conversations, and we still have to move forward and gain traction and talk to funders and all of those other pieces. That's like a given. That's just the whirlwind of a business, right? But the challenge that I think we have is to balance those. Like, how do we balance working on the kind of stakeholder resources and working in those contexts, right? And I think entrepreneurs have to understand that balance, and there has to be, and it really does have to come from the source of any given group. So when we talk about this, I honestly think Victor should be in these conversations, right? Because he's acting as sources Coherence 2025. How is the source has to lead in the balance of building working on and in the business. And if the source is so stuck in the business that's being created and not stepping out to work on the business, I think we lose a huge part of who can actually move these types of pieces of making a fair and equitable business. We lose sight of it. It's just like Sam Walton not seeing and forgetting a stakeholder of future generations and how Walmarts are going to affect those store owners that are right next to the Walmart, right? Or that the lack of having any of those small stores. I think it was unintentionally created because the focus was working too much in the context of like what the business needed at that moment, and it turned into something else. And so I think that's the challenge that we're trying to establish here. But I don't necessarily know the best way of bringing in source to make that balance happen and to have those conversations when the business isn't having those conversations early on. And I also don't know the best way for us moving forward to actually account for what's already been created and understand those stakeholders. So I'm not saying I have any answers. I'm just recognizing the problem, at least from my point of view. And that's I mentioned 3 other collaborative projects. That's exactly what has happened in those 3 other projects. Is we've had someone acting as source, and that's a stakeholder in itself, and the co-originators not agreeing at a later context, at a later point, on who created what. And it dissolved the organization entirely, or the organization had to restart in those 3 instances. I gave you one in our last conversation, Bart, of how, and I don't want to name names because it's so raw and live right now for those 3 organizations. They're going through difficult times trying to reorganize and work through those challenges. But it was because we didn't think about it in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Like it wasn't an actual thought. And I potentially see us going down that same hole with Coherence 2025.
Well, for me comes also the question, like, what's the right timing to have this conversation? Because I understand you may not have this all the way from the start, even though it would be nice. But I also think we don't have like clear frameworks for stewarding this kind of collaboration yet that's like easy to adopt, like the business model canvas, for example. Everybody knows like, okay, we can use that, fill it in, and we don't have that. Well, maybe that's actually, I think it's actually there, like stakeholder mapping and all of that, but then also how to translate that in like attribution or reward or compensation or with a token system, and how do you give utility to the token or tokens? Like I don't know, and that's something that requires quite some time actually to go through. And I think also first there needs to be some sense of coherence within a group that is like, oh yeah, we like creating together, we want to get somewhere, and because otherwise you can start doing a lot of work that might not result in the group actually wanting to work together, right? But yeah, I don't know. And at the same time, this might be kind of essential for building coherence in the group. I don't know. I just think it's interesting that we are exploring this topic. And it's here right now. We are discussing it. So let's see how far we can get this. And I'm also curious, like, how can we bring this back to coherence, and what can we start doing right now in a practical sense?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, when you said business model canvas, like I had to pull this up, like because this is exactly what we're working through. This is Evolute 6's FSC canvas description, right? So you can kind of walk through it in the lean model canvas or any of the other business canvas models. You get a sense of like, I do 1, I do 2, I do 3, I fill this in, and I get a sense of where my business model is at, right? And I think we're building out, this is a fair share commons canvas, but it has the pieces in here that allow us to see, for example, we talked about stakeholders, right? What are the stakeholders doing enough work to understand that? And business model canvases are great for the early stage. Once you fill them out, it's almost like you don't even need them. You actually need to start creating pitch decks and all these other things that are getting the type of message and understanding that you created when you do the model canvas, right? So if we can fill these out and then start creating from there, that's like some of the pieces. And then you come and revisit it to see, are we actually still understanding our concepts, or do we have new pieces of information that allow us to fill in these squares a little bit more fully, right? So
I have a question.
yeah.
Like, would it be an interesting experiment to just give the AI this and then give it a bunch of our conversations and see if it can start pulling things out that match this? Is there
Yeah, I
any
think
purpose?
I think we can. I'm doing somewhat of that. Like I did that with the stakeholders, right? I now have voice conversation or chat conversations for each of my stakeholders, and I'm asking them different questions of like, how do you see the problem within the ecosystem? How do you see? So it's helping me to frame some of those, but I also don't have all the data sets, so I'm not relying on it as much because it's hard for me to put the entire data set in that. But I think that's a great, like, I think we should start doing that. Like, that's definitely a way that we can make this easier. It still takes a long enough time, but I think it actually, once it's built, it allows us to really start to utilize it for these types of things. It's actually one of the models that we're trying to create within the shared common resources with RegenBEE, is actually putting these things, this model canvas, into a framework where you can actually just type this in for your profile for your business and organization and the collaborative projects that you're coming into, and it kicks out some of these answers, right? Like, so I can show you, here's our cell, like I'm going through, this is the slide deck for our canvas, right? And what we've been designing for this. Some of this stuff has come from AI. Some of it is just come from our understanding of these pieces. But that's a potential outcome for us. I think for coherence, we could definitely start doing that. We've already got how many conversations now? Like at least 20 conversations. And we could utilize those. Is that a fair representation of all the stakeholders though? I don't know. I don't think so actually at this point. I don't think we've brought in, because I still have stakeholders that I was hoping to bring in that represent different parts of the technology ecosystem that I think is a part of coherence. But so I think we're actually like the data set that we currently have, it's not fully complete. So we got to fill it in with our best guesses.
So it might be more for just one idea about like for coherence, it might be more that we don't get to map everything, but we can give people some tools like that thing and say, you could try this as a takeaway if we can't get something comprehensive for the MVP.
As a takeaway for what?
As a takeaway to understand their own mapping post coherence. I know that doesn't really solve our internal problems, but gives people a place to start.
Yeah, I think
I don't really understand like what's the context or the why or how this relates to what we're discussing here.
Because I'm not, as Joshua said at the end, like I'm not sure if it's going to be comprehensive, and like it's a big ask to say to people, can you fill in every single gap that isn't filled in currently inside coherence, and give us all that context so that we can make a really clear assessment?
Yeah, I think it comes down to, we can't do this without source. So we actually have to have the conversation with Victor. I think that's a lot of the next step is like, can we don't even have to have all of the context filled out for us to start valuing all the stakeholders. It's just a starting point, right? We have to have, there has to be, because the only person that's going to lead us through that first point of it being nothing and just an idea or a group of ideas into something is a source, is someone that's acting as source within a project. Typically, I mean, there may be another way, but I have not seen collaborative projects run very efficiently or effectively and actually have good outcomes if there's not someone acting as source. And that person coming in as source is to build a regenerative business, actually looking more holistically at the pieces. And if we can have a conversation with Victor, I think that's probably our next step is like, Victor, are you thinking of all of these pieces? And if so, how are we valuing the current stakeholders and the future stakeholders? I think is like a good next step.
Yeah. Well, what I know from an earlier point where we raised this topic is that Victor said that basically whenever a startup would be created, that would be, according to him, the moment to look at this, like how are we going to reward people? And the people that will start the startup will also decide how to retroactively reward the contributions that have been made. At that point, I was like, okay, well, that may make sense. And I think since we don't have any better agreements, I think that's what it's going to be.
Exactly.
So in that sense, it relies on trust of the people that will make decisions on this, that they will also honor the contributions that have been made and the stakeholders that have been involved. I'd be very curious to see how that turns out, right? And that will kind of be a sign or a tell of the concerns that you're raising, Josh. And I think that will also be a way to show indeed how we want to deal with embodying this practice of the fair shares commons and honoring different stakeholders and rewarding them, even also before there's any legal structure or anything. I think this is also it's just a matter of honor as well. And I would care a lot for rewarding people that have contributed in whatever shape or form, even if it's very small. But that's something, I think we need to put maybe some kind of boundary, but there is some key stakeholders that have been contributing so far. And I would love to see them being honored in one way or another, even if it's symbolic.
Mm-hmm. At least attribution at this point. Christine, sorry. Did you have something?
Are we finishing up?
Yeah, let's see if we can put
Okay.
a bow on this in the best way that we can, because this is just, it's like starting a big rabbit hole, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it shows that we all like value this kind of exploration. And perhaps it's like looking at the human evolutionary path, maybe it's going to take 1,200 years to get there. Like, we don't know at this point. Like, how humans can grow and grow with AI and be open to attribution, say, like, even on the scale that social media has these days with billions of users. I think that might be an interesting place to think as well, maybe with your media alliance too, where like there are some simple mechanisms people are trying to use to cross-pollinate ideas. And in some way that provides a record of some kind where you can see how things move through like a ripple through a group and through a culture. Yeah, I think for me personally, if it was my project and I was the source, I would probably dive into just collaboration dynamics because I think for me that is interesting enough that we could get some takeaways from what we've done together. But it's not like we're trying to find every single attribution that ever existed and tag them and allocate them. It's more like it is a qualitative evaluation of what we shared together. So like what the synergies were like between this person and what the synergies were like between this group and this group. And it would be nice to paint that picture and just see that as a takeaway in my mind.
Yeah, I think that's like a base level. If we were
Yeah.
able to do that in every organization before we because I think we're building a startup right now, and that's the biggest thing is like we're building an organization, whether or not we're actually incorporating it or not, it's being built as we speak. And if we allow ourselves the opportunity to work on the business before it actually turns into you know, shares and stakeholders and you know, an actual entity that is sharing value with the market, we have the opportunity to actually design with the ecosystem in mind. And that's really what regenerative business is all about. And so if I'm trying to put a bow on our conversation in that regard, like I think what we got from our conversation here is like we talked about, there was like 2-3 big themes. One being stakeholders, like how do we value all stakeholders? One being you know, attribution of those early stakeholders. How do we actually show that these are the people that created these early pieces? Because in a lot of ways, there wouldn't be anything without those early stakeholders. They're the ones that usually put in the most risk, right? And third, what is the ways that we can generate and open up these different forms of capital and value them for the ecosystem, right? So I know I've put in at least good frameworks and good conversation, lots of different conversations into this ecosystem. So my social capital has been used. But that doesn't get put back into useful forms of capital for me and for others in the ecosystem because we talked about tokenization and those types of things. They could be a solution for us valuing those types of things. But I think it comes down first on how we actually design. And it's a design challenge for us, right? How do we design for multiple capitals and multiple stakeholders sharing the flow of those capital structures? That's a regenerative business in my mind, and it comes down to the early design, or we just turn into the next Walmart. Like it perpetuates it, like it really does. And like you said, Christine, it may be that we're like we have 2 more generations before we get really clear and understanding on that. Like, okay, if that's what it takes, you know. Yeah, that's my bow, I guess. It's not the best bow. Any last words, Bart, Christine?
I don't know. I'm kind of saturated with this conversation, and at the same time, there is a lot more that I'd love to unpack. Yeah, maybe it's good to let this land and integrate. And yeah, maybe we want to have another conversation on this topic a little bit later. I think especially something that we haven't gone very deep in is this thing of when it comes to ideas and intellectual capital, when that gets shared and how we build on ideas and attribute that also using AI and synthesis and like how do you track like where ideas come from. I think that's a very interesting one, and also one notion that was coming up for me there is like how can you also go there beyond ownership of ideas and intellectual capital and rather stewardship, and see the intellectual capital and ideas rather as its own entity, its own being that we're simply taking care of. And what would that look like? And I don't have the answers to that. I'm just planting that seed as something to unpack further, because yeah, we haven't really touched upon that, but I think that's a very interesting one to further unpack. Oh, and thank you. Christy, any last words from you?
Thank you, Bart. Yeah, no, I like that. It just created some real clarity there for me. And I have a feeling that maybe humans will less like grip onto ideas as like my identity is my ideas in this different type of collaborative collective space. So there might be different ways that we see people engaging with intellectual concepts as AI seems to strip them away from people. But there is an opportunity perhaps in that as well. I wonder, in the way that Bart's speaking to.
Well, let's definitely revisit this conversation. And as far as like clear next steps is, I think presenting this conversation to Victor is a good step, right? I think he's going to listen to it. He's very open in the regards of like trying to value and understand what those that are coming and contributing are talking about. So I don't think that's a challenge for us to make that presentation and to have some more conversations around it. But we can't, within this construct, be the one acting as source. Thank you for taking the time. We also have to thank Gus, who had to leave a little early. For those that are listening to this recording and want to dive more into what Coherence 2025 is, there are two main places that you can do so. One is coherence.tv is the website. And if you go onto YouTube and you want to view all the other content, go to Coherence 2025 YouTube channel. Please like, subscribe this conversation if you're listening in that space, and join us for more conversations. Scour those other conversations that resonate with you in this space of collaborative technology for regenerative outcomes. Thanks so much for all the work that you're doing, Bart, Christine, and those that are listening, and we will see you in another conversation. Bye for now. Just a quick thought or a quick sign off, like scale of 1 to 10, how do you think it went? Or just a couple thoughts on what you think, how we think we did.
I can see all the holes now, and there's a lot of them. So
okay,
that's good.
Yeah, no, I think so too. Like, to be honest, I that's what I was hoping to uncover here is like, can we see the design wise the holes in what we're building collaboratively? Because I see us going down very similar rabbit hole or outcomes as I've seen with other collaborative regenerative projects. I hope we don't do the same outcomes. I hope we learn, but at least in that regard, like if we can see that, we can start moving forward.
Yeah, and I think there might be value for the big coherence that we can try to translate some of these questions we have into, if coherence does become a startup, like these curated groups that might be coming through and doing their own coherence experiences. We could have some sort of on-ramp for them.
Exactly. Yeah. That could be how we generationally. It can only be like a couple generations of people doing this iteration of the coherence, right?
Like mice generations, they're really fast, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
there we go.
Yeah, and still it might take 1,200 years before we learn and integrate all this.
We
Right,
can
Christine?
dream.
Yeah.
Yeah, just trying to sense into that timeline.
Yeah,
See
yeah,
what's
yeah,
going
yeah,
on.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You think things are
I feel like we're
accelerating, but
close.
actually
I
we
do.
just need to slow down a lot. I don't know.
It's
You
funny.
think you're close? Yeah.
That's a funny thought though. Like, are we moving too fast to actually make our current culture is so fast moving with business. We call fast companies, we call, like fail fast. Those are moving so fast that we're actually not making or taking the appropriate time to actually build and design regenerative businesses. That's a
Mm,
interesting concept.
yeah, I think so. Like we're all operating with such a like lack of time mindset.
Uh-huh.
And so indeed we like simply because of that we might lack the mindset of abundance of time and eternity that actually would build things that last for eternity, right?
Yeah.
Mm.
The true regenerative outcomes are multi-generational for sure. We're looking at hundreds of years versus, our fast company of getting to revenue and having that hockey stick moment in 2 years, which is the hockey stick moment is actually a false thing. That's just a
Yeah.
piece of the time that we're saying, oh, we
Yeah.
hockey sticked, and then immediately after we went,
Yeah. But
so
it
it's
could
about
be,
the
yeah,
time.
yeah, but it could be, that we are simply gathering or forming and planting the seeds that later will be unpacked. And it could indeed be that we are just before the brink of collapse of society. And, just like with certain forests, you have like that part of the cycle is that you have forest fires and they burn everything. And then after that, the seeds get awakened and they can grow. Maybe
Mhm.
that's what's happening.
Yeah, yeah. Like I would say
You
that's
laugh when you
exactly what's
say that.
happening.
Yeah, I
Oh
somehow
no, we're
find
gonna.
joy in that.
No one wants to burn though. But are we strong enough? Because that's what happens in the forest, right? If we're talking like, I think it's a redwood forest that you're talking about here, or sequoia forest, where it requires the seeds to
There's
burn.
multiple ecosystems, yeah.
Yeah, there's multiple
I think it's
ecos,
the heat, not necessarily burn, but they need the heat, I think.
but the trees don't burn because they're mature enough, and so you're getting that grassland or you're getting the shrubbery burnt off, and the seeds that are in that shrubbery are then able to open up and sprout, right? So there's also a dynamic there. Like you can't kill off the elder um, producing plants or trees in that structure. You got to kill off most of the growth. Um, so it's like, how do we hospice also out of this situation without killing our elders and everybody and families and family units and those types of things in the process, right? The economy still has to die off gradually before a new economy takes over. In any healthy ecosystem, there has to be survivors, and that's a challenge right now. Are we throwing the gas on so heavily, and we're redlining that we're just going to blow out the engine and throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, in recreating something? And so we have to I think there is a little bit of let's hospice the current ecosystem to step off the gas a little bit and not be so heavy footed and allow for some degrowth and transition opening, right? And then let it die off gradually, right? And effectively as we make a transition, because the people that are going to create the next systems are the dispossessed, are the people that don't belong in the current system. And that's us, to be honest. Like I can't even get around it. Like we are a dispossessed society of regenerators, right? No, we don't exist in this current ecosystem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I do think it's also up to us to kind of find that rhythm of slowing down, which is part of reconnecting with nature. When you connect with nature, you kind of naturally slow down and you connect with the eternal and you realize, oh yeah, this all will continue. It's, we if everything falls apart from modern society, I think we will be able to survive, at least many of us. But I also think there's a good chance that many people will die because they simply just go into frantic chaos, and I don't know, civil wars, people killing each other for food or whatever. But I think if you are able to live in connection with nature and community, and you can share the abundance of what nature has to offer, then we can continue living, no problem. But it's a skill that many of us don't know. Many of us haven't learned that. So I think that's the best way to kind of prepare ourselves also for whatever is coming. It's all about resilience in the end.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm on this path with you guys. Like, let's just keep on working at it. It's
Yeah. I know, I'd rather be us and not like compromise all that just to try to do things that we think are the proper thing to do.
yeah, perpetuating the current system. I'd rather not perpetuate the current system, be completely outside of it, and try to build towards a better future, even if that doesn't seem as plausible or overly. It often feels very overwhelming. And like you said, this conversation is super saturated right now for me as well, but we still have to like continue to have it, Yeah, thanks again, everybody, for the time. I do have to get going as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah. See you all tomorrow.
thank you, guys.
See you tomorrow.
See you later. Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.